The first thing I heard that night was not a scream, not a crash, not even the sound of the ambulance doors opening. It was the radio. A flat voice cutting through the quiet of Meridian Ridge Regional Medical Center, saying three words that made every experienced person in that building move faster. Gunshot wound. Unstable vitals. Possible fragmentation. 2 minutes out. My name is Caleb Mercer, and after 20 years working trauma rooms, I thought I had already seen every kind of emergency a human being could survive. I was wrong. Because sometimes the hardest patient to save is not the one lying on the table. Sometimes it is the memory of the one you couldn't save years before. I was standing near the nurse's station holding a patient chart when the call came through, and before I even realized what I was doing, my feet were already moving toward the ambulance entrance. That was when my colleague Daniel Ruiz looked up from the trauma board and shook his head. "Caleb, you're not running trauma tonight. Sarah's lead." I knew he was right. Sarah Collins was one of the best trauma surgeons in the hospital. Calm under pressure, the kind of person who could walk into chaos and somehow make everyone else breathe slower. But I kept walking. "I know," I said. Daniel stared at me. "Then why are you heading there?" I stopped for half a second, looked back at him, and honestly, I didn't have a perfect answer, because whoever is coming through those doors is going to need every set of hands they can get. Daniel knew me well enough to understand there was something else behind my words. He just didn't know what it was yet. 6 years earlier, I had made a promise to myself that I would never freeze in a trauma room again, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly what it felt like to do everything right and still watch someone slip away. The ambulance doors exploded open moments later, and the room changed instantly. A young man was rushed inside on a stretcher, his clothes soaked through, the emergency dressing placed over his injury with the kind of precision that told me whoever treated him knew what they were doing. This wasn't random first aid. Someone had fought hard to keep him alive before he reached us. The paramedic looked at me and said, "Male, 26, found near a construction site. Single gunshot reported, pressure dropping." We couldn't stabilize completely, but I wasn't looking at the paramedic. I was looking at the wound. Something about it bothered me. The pattern didn't match. A normal gunshot wound has a story, a beginning, a path, an expectation. This one looked different. The damage wasn't clean. It wasn't predictable. It looked chaotic, like something had broken apart before reaching a body. My hand stopped for just a moment, and in that tiny pause, I wasn't standing in Meridian Ridge anymore. I was 6 years earlier, back in another trauma room, with another young man named Evan Cole. Evan was 24 years old, full of plans, the kind of person who talked about the future like he had already seen it. He wanted to become a firefighter. He used to joke that he was training for a job where people ran away from danger while he ran toward it. The night he came into my emergency room, I believed I could save him. I had the training. I had the experience. I followed every protocol exactly the way I was taught, every step, every measurement, every decision. But by sunrise, Evan was gone. And the worst part wasn't that I had failed. The worst part was that everyone told me I hadn't. They told me I did everything correctly. They told me there was nothing more I could have done. Those words were supposed to comfort me, but they never did, because somewhere inside my head, I kept replaying that night, wondering if there was one moment where I could have looked closer, thought differently, questioned the obvious. Now, 6 years later, that same feeling came rushing back. "Caleb," Sarah said sharply, pulling me back into the room. "I need those shears." I reached for them, but my eyes stayed on the injury. "This isn't from a standard firearm," I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked. I pointed toward the pattern. "This isn't one direct path. This is a fragmentation injury." The room became silent for a second. In trauma medicine, silence usually means someone has said something that changes the entire situation. Sarah stepped closer. "Are you sure?" I looked at the monitor, then back at the patient. "No, not the way a machine is sure, but I've seen this before." Daniel crossed his arms. "And what are you saying?" I took a breath. "I'm saying if we treat this like a regular gunshot wound, we might be fighting the wrong battle." Sarah looked at the injury, then at me. She had heard about Evan. Everyone in our department had. They knew that case stayed with me. They knew there was a reason I never walked away from the trauma floor for good. "Caleb, what do you want to do?" she asked. And that was the moment I felt the weight of the room, because this wasn't just about a patient anymore. This was about trust. about whether years of experience meant anything if you weren't willing to challenge what you thought you knew. I looked at the young man on the table, someone who had no idea that a group of strangers were fighting for his life. Then I looked at Sarah and said the words I never thought I would have to say again. I need 90 seconds. Daniel frowned. 90 seconds for what? I picked up the equipment and stepped forward, for a chance to do what I should have done 6 years ago. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire trauma room waited. And for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to prove I was right. I was trying to make sure I didn't repeat the one mistake that had haunted me every single day since Evan Cole opened his eyes for the last time. The room went completely quiet after I said those words. Because everyone in trauma medicine understands one simple truth. Confidence can save a life, but overconfidence can destroy one. And standing there with every person watching my hands, I knew there was no room for pride anymore. I wasn't trying to be the hero in the room. I wasn't trying to prove that I was smarter than the protocols or more experienced than everyone else. The truth was much less dramatic. I was a man who had spent 6 years wondering if he had missed something, and now another person was lying in front of me with the same invisible warning signs. Sarah stepped closer and lowered her voice. Caleb, explain exactly what you're seeing. That was the thing I respected about Sarah. She didn't dismiss people because they challenged her. She wanted the reason behind the decision. She wanted facts. I pointed toward the injury pattern and said, look at the way the damage is distributed. A regular shot usually gives us a predictable path. This doesn't. Something broke apart before it reached him. Multiple fragments, different angles, different problems. Daniel looked at the monitor and then back at me. And your concern is? My concern is that we're treating the obvious problem and ignoring the hidden one. Nobody liked that answer because hidden problems are the ones that scare experienced doctors the most. You can fight what you see. You can measure it. You can prepare for it. But the thing you don't recognize until it's too late. That's what keeps people awake at night. Sarah looked at the clock. You have 30 seconds to convince me. I nodded. Fair enough. In a trauma room, nobody gets special treatment because they have a good story. You earn the right to be heard. I explained what I believed was happening and why the standard approach could create another chain of problems. Daniel still looked uncertain. Caleb, if you're wrong, we lose him. I looked directly at him. I know. And if we follow protocol, he asked. I paused. Then we might lose him anyway. That sentence changed the room, because everyone there understood the uncomfortable reality. Sometimes medicine isn't about choosing between right and wrong. Sometimes it's choosing between two risks and having the courage to accept responsibility for your choice. I moved forward. My hands were steady now. The fear was still there, but it was no longer controlling me. 6 years ago, I had been afraid of being wrong. That night, I realized something different. The greater danger was being so afraid of being wrong that you stopped thinking. The team worked around me. Nurses prepared equipment. Sarah monitored every change. Daniel watched the numbers like his eyes could force them to improve. And for a few moments, everything seemed to move in the right direction. Then the monitor changed. The sound was different. Every person in that room knew it instantly. Rhythm change. A nurse called out. He's going unstable. The numbers started moving the wrong way. And suddenly the confidence in the room disappeared. Daniel looked at me. Caleb, just my name. But I knew what it meant. Are you sure? Is this the moment where we stop? Is this where you admit you made the wrong call? And for a brief second, I was back in that old room with Evan. I could almost hear the sounds from that night. The voices, the machines, the moment when everyone realized we were running out of time. My chest tightened. The easiest thing in the world would have been to step back and say, I was wrong. Nobody would have blamed me. In fact, some people probably expected it. But then I looked at the patient in front of me, and I remembered why I had become a trauma doctor in the first place. Not because I could save everyone. Nobody can. I became one because when someone's worst day arrived, I wanted to be the person willing to stand there and fight alongside them. Give me 1 more minute, I said. Daniel stared at me. Caleb, we don't have much more than that. I know. Sarah looked between us. What happens if you're wrong? I answered without hesitation. Then I stop. I say I was wrong. I take responsibility. That was the part people don't see about emergency medicine. They see the dramatic moments. The quick decisions. The person running into the room when everyone else is panicking. What they don't see is the wait afterward. Every choice follows you home. Every patient has a face. Every outcome has a memory attached to it. The team continued working. And slowly, almost impossibly slowly, the monitor began to change. not dramatically. Not like a movie where everything suddenly becomes perfect. Real life doesn't work that way. Real life gives you small signs. A number moving in the right direction. A breath becoming more stable. A room full of exhausted people realizing they might have another chance. Daniel looked at the monitor, then at me. He didn't smile. Trauma doctors rarely celebrate too early. But his expression changed. He understood. The decision wasn't about breaking rules. It was about understanding why the rules existed in the first place. The patient was rushed towards surgery, and for the first time that night, the room became quiet again. I walked outside the trauma bay and leaned against the hallway wall. My hands finally started shaking. That's something nobody tells you. The hardest part isn't always the emergency itself. Sometimes the hardest part is when the emergency is over and your body finally realizes how close everything came. Sarah walked out a few minutes later and stood beside me. You never told me that's why you reacted so fast. I looked down at the floor, because I didn't want anyone thinking I was making decisions because of a ghost. She nodded. Maybe you weren't. I looked at her. She continued, maybe you were making a decision because you learned something from it. Those words stayed with me, because for years, I had carried Evan's death like a punishment. I thought remembering him meant I was trapped in that night forever, but maybe remembering him was the reason someone else got another chance. The next morning, we learned the patient's name was Noah Bennett, 26 years old, a construction engineer who had been inspecting equipment at a remote site when the accident happened. His family arrived before sunrise, terrified and confused, asking questions nobody wants to answer in a hospital hallway. Will he wake up? Will he be okay? Did we get here in time? I had answered those questions hundreds of times, but that morning felt different, because I knew exactly what it felt like to stand on the other side of that conversation. A few days later, Noah opened his eyes. He was weak, confused, and still trying to understand what happened. When I walked into his room, he looked at me and asked, "Are you the guy who wouldn't give up?" I laughed a little because doctors aren't supposed to be characters in someone's story. We're supposed to be the people behind the scenes. I just did my job, I told him. Noah smiled slightly. My family says somebody fought pretty hard. I looked away for a moment. Because the truth was, I wasn't only fighting for Noah that night. I was fighting for the part of myself that I thought I had lost 6 years earlier. But the story didn't end there. Because saving Noah's life answered one question for me, but it created another one. A question that divided our hospital, challenged everything we believed about experience versus protocol, and forced everyone to ask something uncomfortable. When should a doctor trust the rules, and when should they trust what they have learned from the moments when those rules weren't enough? For weeks after Noah Bennett left the hospital, people kept asking me the same question. Was I right to step outside the standard approach that night? It was the question that followed me everywhere, from the trauma department hallway to the quiet moments when I was driving home after a long shift. Some people believed I had done exactly what an experienced doctor should do. They said years of seeing unusual injuries, years of standing beside patients during their worst moments, gave me something that couldn't always be written in a textbook. They called it instinct. They called it experience. They said I recognized a pattern because I had lived through that nightmare before, but not everyone agreed. There were people who believed I had crossed a dangerous line. They argued that medicine cannot rely on one person's memory, no matter how many years they have worked. They said protocols exist because emotions, pressure, and personal history can cloud judgment. And the truth is, I couldn't completely disagree with them, because for most of my career, I had been the person telling younger doctors the exact same thing. Slow down, trust the process. Don't let panic or personal feelings decide for you. A trauma room is not a place for ego. It is not a place where someone gets to be a hero. It is a place where every decision has consequences. But after that night, I realized something important. Following a rule and understanding a rule are not always the same thing. A protocol is built from experience. It is created from thousands of cases, thousands of lives, thousands of lessons learned the hard way. But sometimes experience also teaches you when a situation doesn't fit inside the normal box. And when that happens, the hardest decision isn't knowing what to do. The hardest decision is accepting that whatever happens next will belong to you. A few months later, Noah came back to Meridian Ridge Regional Medical Center for a follow-up appointment. I almost didn't recognize him at first. The last time I saw him, he was unconscious under bright trauma lights, surrounded by machines and people fighting against the clock. This time, he walked through the hospital entrance on his own 2 feet. He was still recovering. He moved carefully. He looked tired, but he was alive. And honestly, that was enough. He walked into my office carrying a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten card from him and his family. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't something anyone would frame and put on a wall. It was just a few honest words written by people who almost lost someone they loved. And somehow, that meant more than any award I could have received. Noah looked around my office and smiled. "You know what's funny?" he said. "My family keeps telling me the story of what happened that night, but I don't remember any of it." I smiled. "That's probably a good thing." He laughed quietly. Then he looked at me and said something I never expected. "They said there was a doctor in that room who refused to give up." I looked down because I never really knew how to respond to things like that. Doctors aren't supposed to be the center of the story. We're supposed to be the people working behind the scenes while someone else gets another chance at life. "I was just doing my job," I told him. Noah shook his head. "Maybe, but someone still had to do it." That sentence stayed with me, because for years, I had carried Evan Cole's death like a weight I could never put down. I thought remembering him meant I was trapped in the past. I thought every difficult trauma case was just another reminder of the one person I couldn't save. But Noah helped me understand something I had never allowed myself to believe. Maybe Evan's story wasn't only about losing someone. Maybe it was also about what I learned from losing him. Maybe every painful memory, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had shaped the person who stood in that trauma room 6 years later. We all carry moments that change us. Some people carry failures. Some carry regrets. Some carry choices they wish they could redo. But the question is not whether those moments follow us. They do. The question is whether we allow them to destroy us or teach us. I still believe in rules. Still believe in training. I still believe every young doctor, nurse, and emergency worker needs structure because lives depend on it. But I also believe that experience matters. The kind of experience you cannot gain from reading a manual. The kind that comes from standing in front of impossible decisions and having to live with the outcome. Because the reality of emergency medicine is that there are no guarantees. There are only people doing their best with the information they have in a moment that will never happen the same way twice. Looking back now, I don't think the biggest battle that night was between me and a medical protocol. I think the biggest battle was between who I had become after Evan died and who I needed to become for Noah to survive. 6 years earlier, I walked out of a trauma room feeling like I had failed. That night, I walked out of another trauma room, understanding that failure and growth can sometimes come from the same place. The difference is whether you choose to look away or learn from it. And maybe that's true for all of us, not just doctors. Maybe everyone has a moment they replay in their mind, a conversation they wish they handled differently, a decision they wish they could make again, a time when they wonder, what if I had done something else? But we don't get to rewrite the past. All we can do is decide what we carry forward from it. The mistakes, the losses, the difficult moments, they can either become the chains that hold us back or the lessons that help us move forward. That night in the trauma room reminded me why I chose this career in the first place. Not because I could save everyone. Nobody can. Not because I always knew the answer. Nobody does. I chose it because when someone's life falls apart in front of them, they deserve someone willing to stand there and fight for every possible second. So now I want to ask you something. If you were in that room, watching the monitor drop, knowing the risk, knowing that one wrong decision could change everything, would you have trusted Caleb's judgment and allowed him to challenge the usual approach? Or would you have insisted that the safest choice was always to follow the established protocol? There are arguments on both sides, and that's what makes this story worth discussing. Let me know your opinion in the comments. I want to hear what you would have done if the decision was yours. And if this story reminded you that the people who save lives are also human beings carrying their own fears, memories, and doubts, share it with someone who might see things differently. Because sometimes the greatest act of courage is not knowing you are right. Sometimes it is having the courage to make a difficult choice, accept the consequences, and still step forward when someone else needs you.